Roberto stared at the single, crumpled dollar bill resting on the scarred wooden table of his small, dimly lit apartment. To the unillumined mortal mind, his situation appeared utterly desperate, a perfect picture of complete ruin. He had lost his employment 3 months prior, and his financial obligations were piling up around him like a mountain range impossible to scale. His parents had passed on the year before, leaving him seemingly alone, adrift in a cold and uncaring world. But you must understand a fundamental spiritual truth. In the realm of divine spirit, there is no such thing as being alone, and there is certainly no such thing as being destitute. What Roberto was experiencing was merely the outpicturing of a fear-based consciousness, an illusion of lack that had temporarily clouded his perception of reality. That evening, wandering the streets and searching for any sign of work, he stumbled into a dusty second-hand bookstore. Drawn by a force he could not then name, his eyes fell upon an old, worn volume. It was a book on the practice of scientific prayer. He checked the price. It was exactly the $1 he held in his pocket. Immediately, his rational mind, deeply conditioned by the belief in poverty and limitation, screamed in protest. It told him he needed that money for a morsel of food, that buying a book was foolishness in the face of starvation. But beneath the noisy clamor of his human fears, another voice spoke. It was the still small voice of spiritual intuition, gentle yet entirely uncompromising, urging him to take the book. Perhaps this is the exact answer I have been seeking, Roberto thought. In a supreme act of faith, overriding the terror of his mortal mind, he handed his last physical currency to the shopkeeper. His hands trembled, but his soul had made a decision. Poverty is not God's will for you. Roberto read aloud, his voice breaking the heavy silence of the room. Your divine heritage is perfect abundance in every aspect of your life. These words rang in his heart like great bells of hope sounding in the deepest midnight. The spiritual law laid out before him was flawlessly logical. Your external problems, your debts, your empty bank accounts, are merely the physical reflections of your internal mental patterns. You cannot change the reflection in a mirror without first changing the object doing the reflecting. Change your consciousness, the book instructed, and you must inevitably, by mathematical certainty, change your world. Roberto felt the old heavy, calcified concepts of victimhood falling away from his mind. He decided he would not wait. He would apply this principle immediately. Instead of dwelling on the terrifying appearance of his empty apartment and his empty pockets, he turned his attention entirely away from the problem. He focused his mind absolutely upon the presence of God as his infinite, unceasing source of supply. As the first rays of dawn broke through his window, Roberto practiced his first formal spiritual treatment. He sat perfectly still, closed his eyes to the material world, and began to declare the spiritual truth of his being. God is my infinite source of abundance, he affirmed slowly and deliberately. In this perfect moment, I recognize that I am one with divine provision. I completely release all belief in lack, for lack is a lie about God's universe. I accept my divine inheritance of perfect prosperity. Divine intelligence provides everything I need in the exact perfect moment. For 20 uninterrupted minutes he held his mind firmly to this truth. He did not plead. He recognized, and as he did, he felt the tight knot of anxiety in his chest completely dissolve into a profound, undeniable peace. When you pray scientifically, you are simply preparing your own mind to receive the good that God has already prepared for you since the beginning of time. When Roberto finished his treatment, a quiet, unshakable certainty had washed over him. He stepped out onto the street to find work, but he was no longer a victim of circumstance. He walked as a conscious child of the divine, his aura radiating quiet confidence and immense gratitude. He walked straight into the most elegant restaurant in the city and asked to speak directly to the manager. When the manager arrived, Roberto spoke with absolute candor. I have no experience working in fine dining restaurants, he stated, but I have something infinitely more valuable. I have the absolute willingness to serve your guests with total excellence, and the absolute faith that I can learn any task you give me. The manager paused, looking closely at him. He was feeling the undeniable, magnetic radiation of Roberto's elevated consciousness. There is something very different about you, the manager finally said. You start tomorrow as a waiter. In less than 24 hours after applying the law of mind, Roberto had his first magnificent demonstration. If this story of spiritual demonstration is inspiring you and waking up the truth within your own soul, I invite you to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you can discover exactly how Roberto used these very same principles to build a staggering empire of prosperity. Roberto approached his new employment with an attitude that astonished his coworkers and delighted his managers. He understood now that work is nothing more than a physical opportunity to express divine qualities. Each morning, before tying his apron, he practiced his metaphysical treatment. I am a perfect channel for divine service. Everything I do today is blessed by God, and my actions bless everyone I encounter. He served every single table as if he were serving the Christ presence dwelling within those patrons, because he consciously applied the spiritual law of circulation, giving his absolute best with genuine love and joy. The universe had no choice but to reward him abundantly. He quickly became the most requested waiter in the establishment. His tips surged to unprecedented levels. Within 3 short months, his income had multiplied so drastically that he completely paid off every single debt he owed and moved into a beautiful, sunlit apartment. But the divine plan for a human life is always expanding. It never stagnates. One evening, reviewing his beloved book, Roberto read a chapter regarding the discovery of the divine vision for one's life. He realized that his current job, wonderful as it was merely a stepping stone, a temporary classroom. He sat in the silence of his new living room and asked a specific question: Divine intelligence, what is your perfect, expansive will for my life? Show me my true place. In the deep stillness of that meditation, he received a remarkably clear mental picture. He saw vast, rolling properties, incredibly abundant crops, and thriving, happy families working the earth. The vision was so vivid he could actually smell the rich, fertile soil. Agricultural real estate, he thought with surprise. He had never once in his life considered farming or rural property, but the spiritual vision was unmistakable. The Master had written that when God gives you a vision, he simultaneously supplies the exact power, knowledge, and resources required to manifest it in the physical world. You must act on your faith, not on your human fears. Though he still lacked the massive physical capital usually required for such ventures, Roberto immediately began preparing his consciousness to receive his demonstration. Preparation is simply prayer in action. He spent every free moment studying rural real estate markets, reading about agriculture, and taking buses out to the country on his days off to walk large farms. By preparing his mind to receive the property he had asked for, he was demonstrating genuine, active faith to the universe. During one of these weekend visits, an older, weathered farmer took notice of Roberto's radiant spirit and sharp questions. "Young man, I see something highly unusual in you," the older man said. He owned a breathtaking 200-hectare estate that was in perfect condition, but he urgently needed to sell it and retire for health reasons. Roberto recognized the divine hand at work. He sat down with the farmer and negotiated the purchase using strict spiritual principles, absolute honesty, mutual benefit, and complete trust in divine providence. He offered a creative financing agreement that served them both perfectly. The farmer, touched by Roberto's integrity, agreed. In less than a single year from the dark night, he bought that second-hand book with his final dollar. Roberto was the sole owner of a magnificent agricultural estate. With the spiritual and financial profits of his first demonstration, Roberto prepared his consciousness for expansion. But he possessed something far more valuable than the money sitting in his bank accounts. He had cultivated a sterling reputation for absolute integrity, a radiation of spiritual truth that opened massive doors that mere cash could never unlock. To identify his next properties, he did not rely on the limited, fear-based analysis of the mortal mind. He relied entirely on the spiritual intuition taught by the great masters. Before evaluating any piece of land, he would enter the silence and practice his metaphysical treatment, divine intelligence. He would pray, "Guide me clearly and unmistakably toward the perfect opportunities that will serve the highest good for all involved." But the universe will always test your realization of truth to push you higher. Roberto soon faced his first terrifying crisis. A severe, devastating drought descended upon the region, threatening to utterly destroy the harvests across all of his properties. The tenant farmers were gripped by mortal terror. The banks began to exert heavy pressure for their payments. Other agricultural investors were liquidating their assets in a blind panic, selling off generations of family land at pennies on the dollar. It was exactly the kind of situation that breaks a man who relies only on human strength. But Roberto recognized this as the moment to apply the deepest, most powerful teachings of scientific prayer. He remembered the unshakable truth: Apparent crises are never endings. They are simply magnificent opportunities completely disguised, demanding that you demonstrate the limitless power of God. His strategy, born of the silence, proved to be nothing short of brilliant. The new irrigation systems not only saved their current harvests, but permanently and massively increased the future productivity of all his lands. When the drought finally broke and the rains returned, the properties he had purchased during the panic skyrocketed in value by over 500%. But the greatest dividend was the unbreakable bond forged with his partners and tenants. They had faced the darkest adversity together, standing on spiritual principle, and had emerged infinitely stronger and more prosperous than before. They had learned that true riches are constructed upon a foundation of mutual trust and shared benefit.